Hollywood portrays mobsters as cold-blooded geniuses, but reality is often a comedy of errors. Some wise guys were so dim-witted they actually outsmarted themselves into an early grave. From the genius who built a 5-ton cement tomb to the criminal Santa who met his end in a bakery chimney, these men were their own greatest hits. Don't miss the hitman who hand-delivered his own confession. These are the 7 Mafia members who won Darwin Awards. Sit back and watch what happens when a massive ego meets a tiny brain. 1. In the 1920s, during the era of Prohibition, the Mafia was getting rich by stealing from banks and post offices. One of their favorite ways to get cash was safe cracking. They would send a specialist into a building to blow open the heavy metal doors of a safe. One low-level associate, who we will call Lefty, wanted to prove he was the best safe cracker in the city. He wasn't a master of science, but he was very overconfident. He had heard that professional thieves used nitro, a very powerful and dangerous liquid explosive. A normal criminal would handle this liquid with extreme care because even a small bump could make it explode. But Lefty thought he was too tough to be worried about a little bit of liquid. One night, Lefty and his crew broke into a post office that was rumored to have a massive amount of cash inside. They found the giant steel safe in the back room. Lefty pulled out a small glass bottle of the liquid explosive. He was supposed to slowly drip the liquid into the cracks of the safe door. Instead, Lefty noticed that the bottle was a bit dusty. He didn't want to look messy in front of his friends, so he decided to clean the bottle. He didn't use a soft cloth. He actually began to shake the bottle vigorously to try and get the dirt off the glass. He completely ignored the fact that he was holding enough power to destroy the entire building in his hand. His friends saw what he was doing and started to run for the exit, but it was already too late. Lefty was so focused on making his bottle look perfect that he didn't realize the liquid was becoming unstable. The friction and the shaking caused the chemicals to react. Before he could even reach for the safe, the bottle exploded right in his hands. The blast was so powerful that it didn't just open the safe, it leveled the entire back half of the post office. Lefty didn't get a single dollar from that safe. He didn't get the respect of the Mafia bosses either. He became a legend for all the wrong reasons. He wanted to be a master thief who could open any door, but he ended up closing his own life story instead. The Mafia bosses used his story as a warning for years. Never let a man with a tiny brain handle big explosives. 2. In the 1930s, the streets were a literal war zone for the Mafia. Rival gangs were constantly using machine guns to spray bullets at each other from moving vehicles. To stay alive, every mob boss wanted an armored car. However, professional armored cars were very expensive and hard to get without attracting the attention of the police. One mid-level mobster, who wanted to prove he was a genius inventor for his family, decided he didn't need to buy a special car. He believed he could turn his regular Ford sedan into a rolling fortress using materials he found at a local construction site. He didn't have any heavy steel plates, which is what real armored cars use to stop bullets. Instead, he had a brilliant idea. He decided to use wet concrete. He firmly believed that if he poured a thick layer of cement inside the doors and under the floorboards of his car, it would be strong enough to stop any bullet from a rival gang. A normal person would realize that concrete is incredibly heavy and that a regular car is not built to carry thousands of extra pounds. But this wise guy was so focused on being safe from bullets that he completely forgot about the weight. He spent several days in his garage pouring bag after bag of wet cement into the hollow spaces of his car. He filled the doors, the trunk, and even the floor until the car was sitting much lower to the ground. He was so proud of his tank that he invited a few other mob members to come see it. He told them that they would be the safest crew in the city. He actually believed he had outsmarted the police and the car manufacturers. He didn't even bother to check if the tires or the engine could handle the massive load. He just wanted to get on the road and show off his new invention. On the very first day he took his fortress out for a drive, disaster struck. He was driving down a busy street, feeling invincible behind his thick cement walls. However, as he drove over a small bump in the road, the extreme weight of the concrete became too much for the car's frame to handle. The entire floor of the car literally snapped and fell out while he was moving. Because he was sitting in the driver's seat, which was bolted to the floor, he dropped straight through the bottom of the car and onto the asphalt while the car was still moving at 30 miles per hour. The heavy concrete-filled car then rolled right over him. He wanted to build a car that would save his life, but he accidentally built a 5-ton trap that ended it instead. He proved that even in the mob, you can't ignore the rules of weight and balance. 3. Back in the old days of the mob, the biggest problem for any criminal wasn't just doing the crime, it was making sure the evidence disappeared forever. Most mobsters used simple methods like the bottom of a lake or a deep hole in the woods, but one young mob associate, who we will call Vinny, thought those old ways were too messy and risky. Vinny spent a lot of time reading comic books and watching movies where villains used vats of acid to make things vanish instantly. He truly believed he was the smartest person in his crew, and that he had found a scientific way to become the mob's top cleanup man. Vinny didn't have a college degree, and he definitely didn't know anything about chemistry. He just knew that acid was strong and could melt things. He went to a local supply store and bought several large plastic drums and a massive amount of high-strength industrial cleaning acid. Instead of doing this in a safe, open area with plenty of fresh air, he decided to set up his laboratory in a tiny, cramped basement with no windows and a heavy metal door. A normal person would know that mixing powerful chemicals creates dangerous fumes that can be fatal to breathe. But Vinny was so excited about his brilliant plan that he didn't even think about a mask or a fan. He started by filling the large plastic drums with the clear, biting liquid. He was so confident in his idea that he didn't even wear gloves. He actually believed the fumes were just a sign that the acid was working hard. As he poured the last bottle into the vat, the small basement began to fill with a thick yellow cloud of toxic gas. Because there was no wind and the door was shut tight, the gas had nowhere to go. Within minutes, Vinny started to feel dizzy. Instead of running for the door, he stayed to stir the mixture with a wooden pole, thinking he just needed to finish the job quickly to prove his worth to the bosses. The chemicals reacted with the moisture in the air and in Vinny's own lungs, turning the air he breathed into a burning trap. He finally realized he couldn't breathe and tried to reach for the door handle, but his vision was blurry and his legs felt like lead. He collapsed right next to his open vats of acid. He wanted to be the man who could make any problem disappear, but he ended up making himself vanish from the mob's payroll instead. He proved that you can't play with heavy chemistry in a small room without paying the ultimate price. The bosses found him the next day and decided that from then on, they would stick to the old-fashioned way of using a shovel and a quiet patch of woods. 4. In the late 1970s, a crew of low-level mob associates in Florida thought they had come up with the perfect plan to smuggle a massive shipment of illegal goods into the country. They were tired of being chased by the Coast Guard and wanted a way to move across the water without ever being spotted. The leader of the group, a man who thought he was a tactical genius, came up with what he called the ocean ghost strategy. He believed that the secret to a successful getaway wasn't speed, but total invisibility. A normal person would understand that the ocean is a dangerous place where being seen is actually a safety requirement, so other ships don't hit you. But this crew was so focused on being sneaky that they ignored every rule of maritime safety. They bought a large, powerful speedboat and took it to a hidden warehouse near the docks. There, they spent 3 days painting every single inch of the boat, the hull, the deck, the engine, and even the seats, in a very specific shade of ocean blue. They firmly believed that from the air or from another ship, the boat would blend perfectly into the waves, making them impossible to track. On the night of the big run, they loaded the Ocean Ghost with their cargo and headed out into the deep Atlantic. They were so confident in their camouflage that they decided to turn off all the navigation lights. They actually believed that the moon and the stars provided too much light and might give away their position. They wanted to be completely dark and completely silent. However, there was one major flaw in their genius plan. They had spent so much time painting the boat and worrying about the color that they completely forgot to check the fuel gauge. About 20 miles away from the coast, in the middle of a major international shipping lane, the engine sputtered and died. They were out of gas. They sat in total darkness, in a boat that was painted the exact same color as the water around them, with no lights and no way to move. They weren't just hidden from the police, they were now invisible to the massive 1,000-foot cargo ships that traveled through those waters every night. A normal sailor would have carried a flare gun or a radio, but this crew thought those things were too loud and would attract the wrong attention. As they sat in the silence of the open ocean, the sound of a massive engine began to rumble in the distance. A giant container ship was heading directly toward them at full speed. Because the Ocean Ghost was painted blue and had no lights, the radar on the big ship didn't pick them up, and the lookouts on the bridge couldn't see them against the dark waves. The mobsters realized too late that their perfect camouflage was a death trap. They tried to wave their arms and scream, but they were a tiny blue speck in a giant blue desert. The massive ship struck them without even feeling the impact. They wanted to be ghosts of the ocean, and unfortunately, their wish came true. They proved that sometimes being seen is the only thing that keeps you alive. 5. In the 1970s, the streets were getting very hot for a mobster we will call Jimmy the Ice. Jimmy was in deep trouble with a rival gang because he had lost a large shipment of goods. He knew that a hit squad was out looking for him, and he was terrified. Jimmy wasn't the bravest man in the world, and he certainly wasn't the smartest. Instead of leaving town or going to the police, he came up with a genius plan to hide in plain sight. He worked part-time at a massive industrial meatpacking plant on the edge of the city. He believed that the plant was the last place anyone would look for him. A normal person would find a quiet basement or a friend's house to hide in. But Jimmy wanted to be completely untouchable. He decided that the safest place in the entire building was the giant walk-in industrial freezer. This freezer was a massive room made of thick steel and heavy insulation. It was designed to keep thousands of pounds of meat at a temperature of 20 degrees below zero. Jimmy firmly believed that even if the hitmen came into the plant, they would never think to check inside a freezing cold room full of hanging beef. One Friday night, Jimmy saw a suspicious black car pull into the parking lot. He panicked. He ran into the back of the plant and scrambled toward the giant freezer door. He grabbed a heavy metal bar and used it to prop the door open just a crack while he climbed inside. Once he was safe in the back of the dark, cold room, he pulled the heavy door shut. He actually believed he was in a fortress that no one could break into. He sat down on a crate of frozen steaks and waited for the danger to pass. He even brought a small flashlight and a sandwich to keep himself busy. However, Jimmy made one fatal mistake that proved he wasn't a mastermind. He was so focused on the hitmen outside that he never looked at the inside of the door. This specific model of industrial freezer was very old. It was built before modern safety laws required an emergency release handle on the inside. Once the massive steel latch clicked into place from the outside, the door was locked tight. There was no handle, no button, and no way to open it from the inside. Jimmy was now trapped in a steel box that was designed to stay at a deadly temperature. As the minutes turned into hours, the cold began to seep through Jimmy's thin leather jacket. He realized too late that the fortress he had chosen was actually a giant trap. He tried to bang on the door and scream for help, but the walls were so thick and insulated that not a single sound could escape. The loud hum of the cooling engines drowned out his cries. He wanted to be the man who outsmarted the mob. Instead, he became a cold case in a very literal way. The workers found him on Monday morning when they opened the plant for the new week. He proved that when you are hiding from your enemies, you should always make sure you have a way to get back out. 6. Back in the 1930s, during the peak of the Chicago mob era, there was a young man named Fast Eddie. Eddie wasn't fast with his feet, but he was very fast with his mouth. He loved to brag about his life as a gangster. He wanted everyone to know that he was a big deal and that he moved in circles with the most dangerous men in the city. Most mobsters are taught from day one that the #1 rule is omerta, which means staying silent. You never talk to the police, and you certainly never write anything down. But Eddie thought he was much smarter than the old-fashioned bosses. He believed that he was so clever, he could leave a trail of clues and still never get caught. Eddie had a girlfriend named Lucy who lived in a different city. He wanted to impress her and show her that he wasn't just a low-level delivery boy. One night, after a particularly successful job involving a warehouse robbery, Eddie sat down to write Lucy a letter. A normal person would write about the weather or how much they missed their family. But Eddie wanted to be a hero in her eyes. He decided to write a play-by-line account of exactly how the robbery went down. He wrote about the names of the men involved, the exact time they broke the lock, and even how much cash they walked away with. He was so proud of his work that he wanted her to see every single detail. However, Eddie made the dumbest mistake in the history of the underworld. He didn't just grab a plain piece of paper from a notebook. He wanted the letter to look official and classy. He went into the back office of the social club where the mob met and grabbed a stack of formal stationery. He didn't realize that the paper he was using was the gang's own official letterhead. At the very top of the page, in big bold letters, it had the name of the business the mob used as a front, along with the actual address of their secret headquarters. To make things even worse, Eddie signed the bottom of the letter with his full real name and his nickname, Fast Eddie. He folded the letter up, put it in an envelope, and walked to the corner to mail it. But because he was in a rush to get back to the club and celebrate, he didn't pay attention to which box he was dropping the letter into. Instead of dropping it into the blue mail collection box, he accidentally dropped it into a police reports box that sat right next to the post office. He actually believed he had sent a romantic letter to his girlfriend. In reality, he had just hand-delivered a full signed confession directly to the local detectives. The police couldn't believe their luck. They didn't even have to do any detective work. They just read Eddie's letter, which told them exactly who committed the crime, where they lived, and where they were hiding the money. Within 2 hours, the police raided the social club. They found Eddie sitting there, still bragging to his friends about how smart he was. The mob bosses were furious. They didn't just lose their money, they lost their secret hideout because of one man's massive ego. Eddie wanted to be a famous gangster, and he got his wish. His face was on the front page of every newspaper the next day as the dumbest criminal in Chicago. He proved that a pen can be a much more dangerous weapon than a gun, especially when it's held by someone with a tiny brain. 7. In the winter of 1934, the city was freezing, and a mob-connected thief named Slim was feeling the pressure. Slim was a guy who specialized in quiet entries. He hated breaking windows or blowing doors because it attracted too much attention from the neighborhood watch. He believed he was the most agile man in the underworld. He spent his days scouting buildings from the rooftops, looking for a way in that no one else would think of. He eventually set his sights on a massive industrial bakery that was rumored to have a thick payroll safe hidden in the manager's office. Slim spent an entire week watching the building. He saw the heavy steel doors and the barred windows. He realized that a ground-level break-in was impossible. But then he looked up. On top of the bakery was a massive brick chimney that reached high into the night sky. A normal person would look at a chimney and see a path for smoke and heat. Slim looked at it and saw a secret tunnel that led directly into the heart of the building. He actually believed he was being a genius. He thought he could slide down the chimney like a criminal Santa Claus, grab the cash and climb back out before the sun came up. On a Tuesday night at 2 a.m., Slim climbed onto the roof with a heavy rope and a flashlight. He looked down into the dark, soot-covered hole. He didn't see any smoke rising, so he assumed the ovens were turned off for the night. This was his fatal mistake. Industrial bakeries in the 1930s didn't just turn their ovens off. They kept the pilot lights and the massive coal beds glowing 24/7 to keep the building warm and the dough rising. Slim tied his rope to a nearby vent and began to slide down into the darkness. As he descended, the space began to get tighter and tighter. The chimney wasn't a straight tube, it narrowed as it got closer to the furnaces. About halfway down, Slim realized he couldn't move his arms. The thick layers of soot made the walls as slippery as ice. Suddenly, his feet hit a metal ledge. He wasn't in the manager's office. He was trapped in the flue, the narrow pipe that directs heat away from the ovens. The air around him wasn't cold anymore. It was starting to feel like a sauna. He firmly believed he could just wiggle his way back up, but every time he moved, he slipped further into the narrow trap. The real disaster struck when the morning shift arrived at 4 a.m. The bakers started stoking the coal fires to get the ovens ready for the morning bread. As the heat rose, it had nowhere to go but up the chimney, right where Slim was wedged tight. He wasn't just stuck, he was now acting like a human cork in a giant bottle of heat and smoke. He tried to scream, but the thick soot filled his mouth and lungs. There was no one on the roof to hear him, and the bakers downstairs just thought the ovens were drawing slow that morning. Slim wanted to be the man who found the perfect, silent entrance. Instead, he became a permanent part of the bakery's history. He proved that a chimney is a one-way street for a reason. When the repair crew finally came to check the clogged chimney 2 days later, they didn't find a pile of soot. They found a man who had tried to outsmart a building and lost. He wanted to deliver a heist, but he ended up delivering himself into a very permanent retirement.